Hey everybody, Scott here at Two Hammers Farm again. I'm working on a little project I thought you all might be interested in. I've seen these tables that they make out of slabs, out of logs, and I've been keeping my eyes open for a suitable tree. And pretty much all of our ash trees have been killed by the emerald ash borer. And I cut this big fella down earlier in the spring. And I saved me several of these slabs. I was going to try making some of those little tables. Now, you can see from this side that my chainsaw skills aren't as good as I had hoped. So they're very uneven tops and they're quite heavy. So I thought I'd show you how I went about getting these sides smoothed up and making them into tables. This is what I'm starting with right here. When I cut these, the tree was mainly dead, but I didn't want it to split and fall apart. So what I did, I just took some deck sealer and I coated both surfaces and around the side with deck sealer, the clear kind, just to keep it from splitting and cracking until I could get it finished up and put some polyurethane on it. So this is what we started with. I've got one over on the table I started with, so we'll move over there and I'll show you how I set that up. Okay, so here's the one I'm in process on, and I thought I'd talk you through how I arrived at this. Basically, I watched several YouTube videos, stole a few ideas, and then worked a couple other things out. First thing I had to do was to make this jig, which is just, in this case, 2x6s, to make a frame for my gantry to slide out. And we'll come back to that. One of the first things I came across was my table's fairly level, but it's not anyways near perfect. So my logs started out, the slabs were about 9 inches thick. So I didn't know how far I'd have to take them down, so I built this out of 2x6s, because then as I need to raise or lower this frame, I can just shim under it. In this case, I got 2x4s, bringing me up to 7 inches. And I started out using my laser level and wasted a lot of time on that before I realized that I don't need to be level. What I need to be is parallel to the table surface. So what I do when I'm setting this up, I just go around this and see that all my measurements are consistent. In this case, it's 7 inches. So especially the two sides that my gantry rides on, I make sure that they're parallel to the table. Now in this particular case, you can see right here, it's real close. And before I put these strips on there, my gantry was hitting there, and that's no good. I gotta be able to clear so my gantry doesn't rock. So these are just some scrap pieces I had around, gave me the little bit extra bump to get my gantry across there. And this is just a bigger version of something I've made before. I just knocked it together out of scrap pieces. I use 1/2-inch plywood on the bottom because where I'm running the router back and forth across it gives me a little bit more depth with the plunge cut on the router. So the way this works is I line this up with where I'm going to run my router next, and I came up with a little bit of a locking system. You see I've got a stop on that side and I've got a movable block down here. So I get it in position, I slide this block in, and I've got a scrap piece that just fits, a little shim. I drop that in here. Sometimes I need the shim, sometimes I don't. And that locks it into place. Now, these lines were a lot cleaner looking when I first started out, because the first bit I tried using was just this straight side bit. It's an inch in diameter. And I just picked it because it was the biggest one I had where I could get a flat surface. And what I came across there was I was having to make multiple passes each time I had my gantry set up. And it wasn't really leaving it as clean as I like. So I got on the old interweb and I ordered one they call a cleanup bit. It's 3 cutters, it's 2 inches in diameter, and it's basically specifically designed for what I'm trying to do here, which is to clean up rough surfaces. Much better result. I'm half the time, and I'm getting a lot cleaner finish when I'm done. Now, the way this works is I put my gantry in place. Let me set this back down. Make sure I'm kind of square to my stop block on the other side. Set that into place. Then my router sits in like that, actually like this. And then basically I just slide it back and forth like this. Now I'm taking off probably 5/8 of an inch to get it down to the same surface. This was a lot cleaner side than I started. The other side, I had to take about an inch and a quarter off to get to a flat surface. Now the other thing I did, because I fooled with these a little bit, and even with your good nylon base on your router, you don't want to be fighting this thing back and forth. You want it to really slide up for you. So I used some of my beeswax finish, and I just wiped it on this bottom of this gantry, so it's a nice slick surface, so it's not fighting me when I slide back and forth. So that's basically the setup. Oh, one thing I didn't mention was when I was picking out my 2x6s to make the frame, you want them get as straight as you can. In the past, I've had to run them through the table saw to true them up, because you want 2 good edges where your gantry is going to sit on, because that will control how flat your surface is when you're done. So I'm going to set that thing on time lapse and just give you a quick overview of how I run through this. It's pretty self-explanatory if you've done any woodworking. And then we'll come back, and as I get to it, go through the process. And if you see, I got a couple different sanders set up. This is an old vibrating sander I bought years ago that works real good. Little palm sander I put a vacuum line on. And the other one, I had to start with the belt sander because I had a lot of lines to take out. And I might get to skip that, but we'll see. We'll come back to that. All right, so I've just finished making my last pass. That's what it looks like when I'm done. Thought I'd mention a couple things I forgot earlier. One thing is, when you're doing something like this, it throws out a lot of chips. So as you move your gantry jig back and forth, knock the chips out of the way, because this is all based on this thing being the same level all the way across. And if you get wood chips underneath there or underneath your gantry, it's not going to be as even as it could. And the other thing is, and this is mainly for people who don't have a lot of experience using the big routers, couple things here. One is, if you're throwing a big bit, and this is a pretty big bit, especially if you're throwing a big bit freehand like this. It's got close to a 1/2 inch cutting depth on that. I'm a little shy about that. I would rather make multiple passes a little bit shallower. 3/16 to 1/4 is about as deep a cut as I make on this. Because when you're throwing a big bit freehand, if that thing gets squirrely for some reason, your cord catches on something, it'll take a big divot, and then you've got to start all over again. You've got to set a new depth. And the other thing is, You want the same depth all the way across, so you gotta have a method for setting the final depth. And what I've done, just because I lost the thing that I set the depth with, it's got the step gauge, which is real handy. But what I've done is I've set it up so that my final cut is when I'm all the way bottomed out on the plunge cut, because that way I can be consistent. So on my last pass, I basically push it all the way down till it deads out, and then I lock it in place, and I get this result. And looking at this, I am gonna have to start with the belt sander. It's better than the other bit, but you can see I've got a number of lines here I'm gonna have to take out. So I'll break all this down, clean up some of the sawdust, and I'll just give you a little taste of sanding it out. Probably won't spend too much time on that because that's pretty basic. And then I'll do another little segment about how I've put the finish on. All right, thought I'd show you a little bit how I get started with the belt sander. I've got 80 grit paper on there, which is very aggressive, which is why you saw me keep it moving all the time, because that thing will carve a divot in a second if you leave it sitting still. And I don't know how much the camera will show you, but I've got very noticeable lines over here, and I've still got that really rough end grain. So on this side, these lines you see here from the cutter head are starting to disappear. They're pretty much gone from right here, and if you catch the light the right way, you can see it. And one thing I noticed, the first one I did, is this edge wood, this sapwood I think they call it, it's quite a bit softer than the heartwood. But that's fine, because I wouldn't mind a little bit of convex surface here, because I'm designing these to be outside in the rain. I'm going to put several coats of polyurethane on here to waterproof them, but still getting it to where the water won't puddle will be nice. And I'll put a straight up edge on there when I finish up. But I just thought I'd let you see how I do that. There'll be several more hours of this. I'll go from the 80 grit to the 120 on the belt sander and get my lines out. And then I'll start on my other sanders just to really polish it up a little bit. Because I'll show you when I put the finish on here. Ash isn't the prettiest wood in terms of the grain popping out, and that's really what I'm looking for here. I want the grain to pop a little bit. So when I get done with all my sanding and work through my various grits, I think 220 is what I finish up with on the palm sander, and that just really smooths it out really nice. I put the stain on here, and I just picked one at random. It's like American something or other, old American vintage or something. But I'll show you that when we get to it. But just hours, it'll take me probably 2 or 3 hours to get this sanded down the way I want it. Starting to get there here.
So this is just some still shots I took of the slab after I got it sanded up good and put the stain on. You can see what I was talking about popping that grain out. Ended up looking pretty good.
Okay, quick little handheld update here. I've gotten one side done with 3 coats of the polyurethane, and I stuck some legs on it. I'm not sure about the design on these. It was pretty green pressure treat 4x4 that I used. When it dries out a little bit, I'm going to put some kind of dark deck stain on there to seal it up. Don't know if I'll stay with that. I was going to show you a couple things here. One issue I ran into, the center's got a nice little crack there that I thought I could just fill with the polyethylene. It just kept running through, so I tried taping the other side. Didn't really fill up. Probably what I should have done was use some of that lucite, that clear stuff that has gotten real popular now. Excuse me. And then just sanded it down and then put my polyurethane on. As you can see, I countersunk pretty good and just used some big 4-inch hex head lag bolts to secure it to the table. And I didn't glue the legs to the table, number one, because it was covered in poly and it wouldn't stick very good. And number two, gave me the flexibility to put different legs on later. The legs I did glue and screw together, and that worked out pretty well. As you can see, all I had to do for this piece was do a 60-degree angle cut, and I bird mouthed that for a little stability. And that's about it on this. Gonna get some help and try to get it off this table and stand it on the ground, and then start polying the other side, the flat surface, and then the round side. And I think I'm just gonna leave the sides kind of that natural look. I'll probably blow it off real good and maybe just lightly brush it to get some of the dirt off. And I think that'll look good when it's polyed up, especially with all the bug trails from the emerald ash borers that killed this big thing.
All right, I'm including this bit for anybody that hasn't done a lot of finish work. I'm at the point, I've got 2 coats of poly on my top surface here. And you always want to take some pretty fine grade sandpaper. In this case, I'm using 220. And I do this between the coats too. And there'll always be a couple rough spots sticking up. And in this case, if you angle down, get the glare of the light on you, I've got a couple of little, where the finish was a little bit thicker. And it's got a little bit of a wave to it. So what I do is just hit it real light. And you gotta scuff it up, that's fine. It actually helps the other layer finish. I had a couple bubbles there, it came up from a crack. I'm gonna hit them a little bit harder. Finish will cover it. And just kind of scuff the whole thing up. And over here, where was it? I got an angle around here. Here's the spot where I had a little bit of a bubble. Now, between the first 2 coats, I used my rig I had set up with my palm sander, and I've got the shop vac hooked to it to pull all the dust off. But when I get done with this, I'll use the air hose, I'll blow it off. I use the rag, dust it off real good before I put my final coat on. And Best thing you can use is your hand because you can feel the little rough spots. And I'm kind of fussing over this for what's going to be an outside table. But if you try to do more than you really need, you won't be dissatisfied if you get less than what you want. Another little bubble right there. First coat I had an ant laid on it. I had to grind him off the next day. Alright, that's probably all I need to do. There's another little spot right there. This final coat especially, you don't want to hit it real hard. After the first coat around this edge where that sapwood was sucking up so much varnish, I hit it a little bit harder. In some spots I took quite a bit of the poly back off just to kind of get it to smooth out a little bit. Well, those bubbles, I don't know about those. That should be all right. Another little bubble right there. All right, so that's that. I'll hit the rag while I've got it, and then I'll use the air hose to get it out of some of the little nooks and crannies. Because this is going to be the last coat one way or another. All right, time to get the poly back out.
So this is the final product. It's still a little wet looking because I just put the last coat of poly on. I ended up liking the way the legs looked once I put some dark stain on, so I'm going to leave those legs on there. I might try something different on the other two slabs. Well, if you've stayed with me to this point, thanks for watching, and good luck on your table. See you next time.